All right. Good evening, Oriole Nation.
All righty, it is welcome everyone. We're going to call the order a special meeting of the Board of Education of School District of North Fond du Lac today on Monday, December 9th at 5:06 p.m. So Terry, when you're ready, if we can do a roll call.
All right, Geckerman
Here.
Huck
Here.
Yeager here, Matthew
Here.
Humphrey
Here.
All right, we have everyone here. Next on is public notification of meeting.
Yep. It was posted at the district office, FLC, BAMS, Horseman, and the village.
Okay, we'll do stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Also, maybe I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Our first item is superintendent's report. So
Yeah, we're gonna take a little stroll here into the academics and learning. I'm gonna show you, just in lieu of time here, we are bringing forward tonight to a look at our library plan, and I'm just gonna kick through this really quickly. Just so you all know, we haven't had a quote LMC director for over 12 years in the district. We had someone who was kind of like filling in, but never got certified. So I brought in a consultant this year to make sure we're compliant with DPI. And one of the tasks is you have to have a 3-year library plan in place to be in compliance with DPI. So what she has done, she started working with our high school and our elementary and our middle, and she's really helped out looking at the plan, a plan where there is a model that the DPI puts out. And that model is very specific to like what area of focus do you want to put into. All we needed to do is create goals within that model to be compliant. You're going tonight, hopefully pass what this is. And maybe if you had any questions, I can go through this, but this is just a little bit of it right here. The person that library media specialist who's acting as that interim for us is Renee Rezel. She's a former library media specialist in Oshkosh. She is now working for this, the University of Ripon, and she's a STEM teacher for that and does a lot of different things with career pathways. Very, very great at what she's doing. Actually, we got her information from Jillian Gordon, who worked with her in Oshkosh, but we needed somebody in like an interim position so that we can move this stuff forward. So again, each school district has to have, each school for that matter, has to have a 3-year library plan. The areas that we focused on, and if you notice, like there is like a little wheel that you can focus on different areas. The areas that we focused on in the 3 years: budget, resources, robust infrastructure, and then data and privacy. And then it breaks down kind of the goals for each one of these areas and the action steps that are needed with each of those zones to make sure this gets done. But on this one, it's by the end of 2027 academic school year, 80% of the database collection will be updated. So this stuff was just sitting idle. It wasn't even updated over the last 10, I would say 12, 15 years maybe, since we had the last LMC specialist in our district. And all digital resources will support the diverse research needs and learning styles of students across all grade levels. And so on the right-hand side there, it talks about different things that's going on, keeping the databases that are being used, canceling subscriptions that are not, collections and libraries that show nonfiction books are minimal, purchase databases to support the nonfiction digital, pilot new databases. You can see all the stuff there, provide PD. So basically a decent plan for, and that's just one part of the plan. We only had to have technically one goal, but there was enough to work on that just is base and foundation stuff that it's not going to take a lot of lifting on our part, but we want to make sure we were good to go. Robust infrastructure is another spoke in that wheel, and similar in the middle there, the district libraries will increase the diversity of their collection of fiction and nonfiction, print and digital, by acquiring 50% new books each year that represent a wide range of reading levels, genres, cultures, and learning. So one of the first big things that we have to do within that is like really weed our books at FLC. Horseman and Bessie have narrowed down, so there's like 9 books per student, or a little bit under. Right now at FLC, there's about 30 students per book, or per student. So that's a quite heavy load of books that we have just sitting and not really, they're gaining dust and not really being used. And so the idea is that we have to weed through that and actually work through that. That's going to take a little bit of time. It took our other individual over at the high school quite some time. She's an aide. She helps out with this. And it took her quite a bit of time just to get to that spot. So that's one of the things that we're really trying to do at FLC. And that's just evaluating what we got and building those nonfiction collections for all learners. There's also a fund that we get from the state called the Common School Funds. This is just and can only be used for the library media centers at schools. It's a hefty little fund that we get and a grant, and there's a lot of good things. And a lot of us are purchasing books, new books. Some of it can be used for devices and other things that you bring into the library setting that students can use to learn. There's such things as like maker spaces. I don't know if you've ever heard of those before, but it's a place where kids can tinker and play, create, do those things digitally or actually build. Those are some things that have really changed in the LMC setting over the last, 8 years, and just making it a place where kids want to be. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So
who oversees like that purchasing fund now?
So Sam over at the high school takes care of that right now, and she's been overseeing that for
years.
Yes.
Okay.
She does, and we look back. Well, the person that was before who left looked over that yearly, just to make sure that we are compliant with that as well. Maria also sees that too, because she sees the Common School Fund, so it's a three-person back. Now Renee will be looking at that, Maria will be looking at that, and so will Sam.
Okay.
Data and privacy. This is the third part of our plan. By the end of 2027 academic school year, our media center procedures will guarantee 100% privacy and accessibility of resources for all learners. So ensuring that obviously the overdue notice is stapled and only student name is visible on overdues. Parent email notices are there, image of the book, title, author, so they know exactly what that looks like. Procedures for overdue books, procedure for fines. There's some school districts that actually, we still collect fines from all of our students. Some school districts have gone away with fines. There's a lot of different ways of doing it, but the biggest thing, we just want to get those books back. In some ways, again, in the last district I was in, is like, if they're keeping the book, that's probably a good thing that they're reading, so we weren't as I guess, after it to get those books back, because we were making sure that kids were getting that. So it's just something that we've got to talk about, and that's part of this process with the data and privacy that we're looking at. Use of space and time, a field here. Implementation of 3-year plans. We'll begin to brainstorm how we can establish. This is where that makerspace comes into place. Different locations within your LMC, so kids want to be there. I mean, that you just want to create this awesome arena where people can continue to learn, and that's where getting 3D printers, robotic kits, coding platforms, other things like that really come into that maker. Spheros, you can program robots and get things going. It just makes it a little bit different, but also encourages students to be in that space. You provide PD for teachers. You have Google Calendar sign up for the make. What we had done on the last district that I was in, you'd have monthly different stuff that was in that maker space. So one month it was robotics. Another month it could have been sewing or creating cards. I mean, there was just different things. One month could be, simplistic of coloring pictures, just an area for kids to have some mental health space too, which it really worked well. The one rule was there's no phones in that area. You go in. We also had a music zone, a kind of a closed off space where kids could record music. That we had a guitar in there. We had a microphone. They could record podcasts. So just making something that, they actually got excited about going into. So different things that can be happening with that in the future. And then this just talks about the DPI expectations for the 3-year plan. It's got to be a fully written, long plan. She's already taken care of that, included with this. It gets sent. As soon as we approve it, it gets sent in tomorrow, and we're compliant with the DPI if you pass this. And that's about it. Any questions on this?
Yeah, just clarification, we haven't had a licensed LMS really on staff for that long, but we've had an agreement with CISA that we had a person that, to make it all legal, came in quarterly or something and did what was necessary to make sure that we didn't have to have that person.
That was prior to me coming in.
Yeah,
Before that, we had Dan, who was acting as that media specialist, and he just kept on saying he's going to renew his license for that, even though he didn't have a license. But an emergency license to stay in compliance with the DPI. That's how we stayed compliant to have the the LMC status, because he kept on renewing those. Dan left, Dan Sitter. So then we had to figure out some other solutions for potentially doing that.
Okay.
So that's the reason why. But before that, you're right. Before Dan, we consulted with CISA. CISA no longer does that.
Okay.
And we looked into that too. And it can be very expensive, but we worked out a pretty good deal and plan with this person right now to move that through. So without purchasing a whole new position for that as well.
Okay.
And they're hard to find. This is like a unicorn again in this world. Like there's not a lot of people going to, get their masters, and you have to get your masters to get your LMC director's position. It's not just a simple, I can go get my LMC directors. It's your educator license plus the masters in that program, which takes some time.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I think I wasn't following then, is Renee then a staff member, or is she just being hired as a consultant?
For
that?
Just
Okay.
what Steve was saying is before, like we did with CISA,
Yeah.
we're doing the same thing now with
Okay.
Renee. She's acting as the interim. So number one, we've got to have a person who's got somewhat licensure as well as that 3-year plan, and then you're satified by the DPI
Okay.
state.
Okay.
Does the funds that you get, does that not go to staffing that position at all within a district? Can it go? I guess
It
the
can't.
question is,
It
okay.
can't. It only has to go to student,
Yeah, well, I didn't know if that
resources,
was.
right? Yeah.
And then you had talked about weeding out books. When we do that, what do we do with those? Like, do we sell them? Do we?
Sell them,
Give
give them
them-
away. I mean, there's like a ton we put out there so that people can have. And then in some cases, like when we've got a lot of students who don't have any books at home,
Yeah, that's what I was
we're
wondering.
donating those back so that they have a better catalog of books at home that they can use. Some of these kids have nothing right now, which obviously the more that reading happens in those early years,
Mhm.
it's the game changer whether or not that literacy happens or occurs as fast with individuals based on that word count and how many they've done.
Mhm.
That brain development, if they're getting a lot of stories read to them early on and more books read to them, there's a greater chance that literacy pickup is going to be a lot better. Many of our families don't have that either.
Yeah.
And so we see that gap already before we even get to the school age. Some of these districts have already attacked that. They've, gone to the, people and said, hey, we got all these books. We're going to give these out to you so that you can have at least a library at home so you can read to your kids. This is how you do this, like training people up. Appleton did that all the time. It did help quite a bit in terms of like that pre-K 4 age to help out with those areas.
Does that happen every year usually? With like you said, we can buy. I think it was 50%.
Yeah, I mean,
New
there's always weeding going on. The significance of this one, though, at the elementary will be pretty significant versus
Sure.
now there's going to be weeding like at the high school and middle school. Yes, there's continuous, and I don't know how many books that is after that year's time, but it's you still have books that are left that they're slowly getting away with. But according to Renee, the catalog at the high school and middle school right now is very good, and the way that Sam has done it right now has been great. So, yeah. Any other questions on that? I'm just looking at it if I got any set. I haven't received anything from Adam. So I'm going to try to punt here as best as I possibly can with y'all. And actually, I'm going to try something really crazy. Rick's like, what? So there's an AI generator. I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but it's called Notebook LM. And Notebook LM is what it does is it takes resources or PDFs. You can upload anything to this bank on the left-hand side. You're basically creating a notebook, right? So all of the docs that you could use, and Rick, we could even take that one doc right here, upload that, put that into that whole thing. I haven't done that yet, but then it gives like this great synopsis or a synopsis. I don't want to say great. I don't want to speak it, before you see it, but you can go from everything from briefing documents to within seconds here of just these are just responses, and it talks about like the overall scores in 2022. Here's the briefing document that just came up. It just took a few seconds to look at all those, but it like even says the accountability score of 68.1 for the 2023 school year, earning a meets expectation rating. This reflects a slight decrease from the previous year's score at 69.7. The district prides itself on outstanding educational program and a safe and nurturing environment, aiming to develop lifelong learners. Notably, it is one of the fastest growing districts in Wisconsin. And then it goes through the strengths, talking about student growth, which we know it's been in that area, on track for graduation. But then it says areas of improvement, where we look at our achievement scores and they are far lower than a lot of districts within the state. Even talking about where that stands overall, tells about, what that's been in and what those targeted groups are. So, I mean, a really quick overview of this, which is pretty amazing in very short seconds. The other thing that it does, which I find very, very, very amazing, it puts it all together and wraps it up into a nice little bow. And I'm just going to hopefully let this play out and see how it works for us all.
Everyone, welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into the school district of North Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. So, we've got a pretty interesting mix of schools here, right? We've got the Friendship Learning Center, Treffer Charter, Bessie Allen Middle School, Horseman High School, and Exploration Charter.
Yeah, a good range there from elementary all the way up to high school.
Exactly. And we want to kind of get a sense of what each one has to offer, how the district is doing overall.
Right.
So we've got a bunch of sources to help us with that. We have the district report card, we have individual school reports, and even a little FAQ document, kind of like a puzzle. We need to piece together all these different sources.
Yep, exactly.
So who is that?
That's a computer.
Really?
Yes. So they took
They do
all
it
that
in,
information and then if you listen on,
Awesome. So let's start with the district as a whole, right? What kind of vibe do we get from the district, just from their own descriptions and materials?
So they describe themselves as being committed to an outstanding educational program with a safe and nurturing environment, and focused on this idea of lifelong learning. It seems like they're pretty proud of their growth too. They're one of the fastest growing districts in Wisconsin.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they have over 1,500 students and a pretty significant open enrollment rate, like 22.3%.
Wow. So people are actively choosing this district. That's always a good sign, right?
Yeah, definitely something to note.
Okay, so that's what
so it's also grabbing information from the web. So it'll go right to the website. It'll go anywhere they can find North Fond du Lac, the district itself. But then what I put on the side here is all the documents from 22-23 and the 23-24. So I uploaded those so that and just seeing what it would do with that. And here's what the kind of
it says about itself. But let's get into the data, right? How are they actually performing?
Well, according to Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, they meet expectations with an overall score of 68.1 out of 100.
Okay, not bad at all.
So this score is based on 4 main areas: achievement, growth, target group outcomes, and on track to graduation.
So it's not just test scores, they're looking at a lot of factors.
Right, it's like, are students actually proficient? Are they making progress? How are different groups of students doing? And then things like absenteeism and graduation rates. It's a pretty well-rounded picture.
Yeah, for sure. So where do their strengths lie? Where are they excelling?
So they actually do really well in growth and on track to graduation. They have a growth score of 67.9 and their on track to graduation score is 85.2. Yeah, and that's supported by their really low chronic absenteeism rate, which is only 6.3%, and then their graduation rate is 95.5%.
So they're keeping kids engaged, they're keeping them in school.
It seems like it, yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, no district is perfect, right? So where do we see some areas for improvement?
Well, one area is their achievement score, which is 49.6. It's actually a little below the state average.
Okay.
And it kind of suggests that, while students are learning and growing, they might not be starting from a place of really strong proficiency.
Got it.
Another thing to look at is that while overall things seem pretty decent, there are some gaps between different groups of students. Like, for example, we see some differences in achievement, particularly in English language arts and math.
Makes sense. It's about making sure all students have that solid foundation.
Right, exactly. And one more thing that stood out to me was participation in advanced courses is significantly lower than the state average. It's only 6.3% compared to 21.1%.
Wow, that's a big difference.
Yeah, so it makes you think about, are there enough opportunities for those students who are ready for a more challenging academic experience?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so that gives us a good overview of the district as a whole, but now let's zoom in a little bit, right?
Right.
Let's start with Horseman High School. What can you tell us about them?
So Horseman, they meet expectations with a score of 66.2. Kind of similar to the district. They're doing really well in growth with a score of 67.9.
Okay.
And in on track to graduation, they have a score of 91.8. but they're mirroring the district's lower score in achievement. Their score is 44.8.
Got it. So similar trends.
Yeah.
But anything unique about Horace Mann that stood out?
Well, one thing that I found really interesting, maybe a little strange, is that 0 students participated in dance or theater courses.
Really?
Yeah. And the statewide average is above 0. So it really makes you wonder what's going on there.
Yeah. Is it a resource issue? Is there just no interest?
So there are some things that the AI misses, and some of that information is not put in there. So I won't keep playing this, but I mean, it does a fairly decent job of like overview for our public to kind of hear some of that. And honestly, like listening to it is like a podcast and going through that. But I just wanted to show you this as a tool and something that, future wise, if this gets more in sync, it makes like presentations to y'all like a little bit easier, where you could listen to this before we even got to this place, or even kicking this out for our public so they could hear that, be it a topic about this or referenda or anything that we're kind of covering, because you can really pocket that and play that. Now, before you do that though, you have to listen to all of it, so you don't have like the AI hallucination going on in there where all of a sudden it says something random or wild in it and has nothing to do with it. Like, so you got to do a little bit of work on that part, but at the same, it's still got a really good start to things here as well. This is just a little information from slide deck here. This became public back in November on the 20th. And, we could forecast a little bit already was happening based upon, some of the information we had already prior. And that comes from our STAR testing and our STAR assessment from years before, just seeing what that growth looked like versus what, we have had in achievement, as well as that target group. If you look here, considerations for this year's report: achieve growth, target group, readiness, multi-years, lagged information there too. And I think what he's trying to say here is like, these are just different areas that we want to really look at. And then he talks about the assessments cut score changes as well, which that deals with the change in the actual forward assessment, and in the math area, it actually flipped to like more of, I don't want to say easier, but for everybody, because they felt like it was getting too difficult. And so they modified the assessment for the whole state. And so with that though, then that cut score changes and you have a different assessment altogether. And so you're getting wonky numbers, and it really isn't, it's apples to, oranges versus apples to apples, which is a drastic thing, different in that whole area. This is some more information. I don't know, did you all receive this from him as well? I guess I want to just push it open to, are there any like questions that you have, or what we can talk about here? If there's other things that we want to address while we're in this, versus me going through every single one of these slides, moving forward here.
Well, I threw out this sheet on breaking it down by the student group. That's one of the questions. I mean, it's clear from this, we've got a difficult demographic situation compared to most districts. And there's quite a bit of disparity between the groups. So I know we're going through this effort that he's talking about in here about the priority standards and all of that. But my concern is, let's be positive and say it's going to work, right?
Yeah.
So it raises everybody up. Does it do anything? Are we doing anything to address the gaps in the groups? Or are we going to still see these same gaps, just at a higher score?
That's a great question. And I think it comes down, it's beyond the priority standards and like moving it to it gets into what does the instructional practice really look like, right? I mean, if you're not like, and what does that design look like in the classroom? And if your strategies aren't strategies that work and that show you, and like there's so much meta-analysis from a lot of different players out there saying, these are the things that work in a classroom. And one of the things, just like we had talked about before, last year's real big movement was on learning targets, if you remember that, so that you took that learning target from the priority standard to say, okay, this is what we're going to learn. We will learn, or students will be able to learn in this class, this time, and this is the information. So students could have a roadmap. This year, we're actually getting into assessment. And our high school and middle school are starting to talk about like, so what does quality assessment look like? Because if you all know, like if you remember going to high school, You could go from one classroom to another, and you could have a completely different type of or style of assessment. You could have 100 multiple choice in this classroom. You could have a 5-page essay in this one, and it all varied so much. But what actually works to gain that evidence of learning for the students? And that's where we have to really start looking at it differently. And in the past, it's been just, okay, we're gonna give you the multiple choice, and this is how it's gonna work. But are students really learning, or are they just regurgitating information and content? Are they actually getting better in math and literacy? And then I would even take it a little bit further. Are they getting better in problem solving, critically thinking, creativity, those essential skills that AI can't do? There's a stop blank where AI cannot start getting to the unpredictable zone. Where those curveballs come, we're gonna have to figure that out on our own and figure out how to make that happen. AI can generate and put things together and try to solve things as best as it can with the information that it knows, but it can't figure it out if you've got all that, that these curveballs come at you. So I really feel like it's the literacy, the math, and then you get into some of those other areas, those skill sets of really helping. Now, how that looks in the classroom, and this is going back to the demographics zone, if you do that well universally, even the students in those other pockets will be lifted, because you're basically saying all students will learn. Will some students need more intervention? Absolutely. And they're going to need more assistance, be it with language or just getting through certain things. We're going to have to continue to apply that intervention throughout the years that we do it. But we've got universally, we're not even to the point where our strategies and our instructional strategies in the work is where it needs to be yet. Once we get into that field where 80% of our kids are all getting the same kind of instruction or similar strategies, achievement should go according to the research and everything that we do, and it will. And we're even seeing at the high school level, just shifting the assessments around and making some differences. People are seeing growth in achievement in their classrooms even, because they're changing the way that they've done the work that they've been doing. And it's not like they were doing the wrong thing. It was just now it's retuning it so that it's more articulate, more laser-like, and more, right down the pipe where we need to get to help these kids learn. I also think the programming that's happening at the elementary level right now with Bridges Math, as well as CKLA, Amplify, in that change in that literacy component for this year, those things will make a difference for all learners, but it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take 5-6 years before we really start seeing anything. You're starting to see some of that growth in the math area when kids get to the middle school level, because now it's been 4 years of Bridges, and you're seeing some of the stuff that they were doing is now, happening, or they're seeing the growth in that when they get to the middle school. But then we have to take a look at the middle school and say, why do we do stuff so differently than what we did at the elementary in terms of strategies? Why are we not using similar strategies to get to that same point? It might be more rigorous, but at the same time, we've got to do some different strategies within that same area to get to that next level. Because what's happening is the kids go in 6th grade, and all of a sudden it's oh, this is a completely different way of learning math. Which it shouldn't have to be that. We should just continue them all the way through. And that's what we're working towards as well.
Because I guess that was another question I had is, I know we're working inside the buildings, but are we working across the buildings? Because from what I understand, there's the 8th graders last year are really struggling as freshmen this year. And so it appears that they're not working across the buildings. And I didn't know if that's true or not, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we're starting to have those conversations, at least with the math zone, because that's part of the audit 612, is to start looking at the way we're practicing right now. And the next thing is to really look at what is that tool that we're using, because right now we use Big Ideas Math, and it's a decent tool, but it's very traditional in the legacy model of what we do. The one upside to it is it's got online practices that kids can go in and do some of the work on that way. Does it get to the different strategies though within that to make the instructional design different so that the learning happens, at a greater rate? No, not yet. So we're going to look at some different tools that some other school districts are using that have seen that in all of their students. It's not just this population is increasing. It increases for everybody within that range. And it's simply by walking through a different way and different strategy of teaching math. And I wonder myself, when I watch that same practice and those same practices, I probably would have liked math a little bit more than what I do now. And I think a lot of kids get turned off. And if you can come in and watch what's happening at the elementary, where kids are writing on the walls in terms of like the glass walls is showing and working out problems together and actually talking about math, and they're actually talking about when they come home, that's what we want to get to. And that same stuff should happen at the 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, even when you get into the high school zone. So yes, are we there with ELA yet or literacy? No, because that program is just starting. But we do have like people like Jen Towell, who is our ELA coach, our literacy coach. She was at one of the meetings one time and they get a lot of cool. Yeah. She's really going back and forth between the elementary, middle, and high school. And so she's like navigating back and forth, helping out with strategies all along the way. Even we know we're not going to get to that type of tool yet for a little bit because we just can't move it that fast. We got to take it bit by bit. And unfortunately, it's just going to go step by step within those grade levels as we move forward. Does that answer your question? I mean, it's a lot, but it is, going across all K-12, which we need to do. And as like Ted Neitzke said, like your first graders now are going to be when they're seniors, you'll be determining whether or not, that'll be the tell. Did you get them through that process and has it, made that difference? I mean, it's a bit of time, but even the stuff that we're doing in terms of practice and teaching up those practices at the high school level right now, I know for sure, those are going to make a difference. All those little things do make a difference, and everyone's doing it universally. So when I go from one classroom to the next, and it's like, oh, I see that similarities. Oh, some of those same strategies I can connect these things. It's good. I'm learning. I'm putting this together. Kids feel like they're getting feedback back really quickly. I mean, all those factors are going to be huge in that learning development. Now, are we there yet in every single area? Not yet, but that's the goal and the work we're going to do. And that's where we see those, even no matter what your demographics are, you're going to see increases for all those. Will there potentially be a gap there? Potentially.
No, I mean, I can see there being a gap. I just think they're pretty wide now.
Yes.
And I would say too, like just looking at the groupings here, that we're underperforming in all, compared to, some benchmarks, local benchmarks. So I think there's.
Well, even if you look across, because you're right, the state keeps changing how they're doing these scores. So it's hard to compare a score this year to a score last year. But what I think is a fair comparison is where do you rank in the state for, like, we're in the 421, we're around 380, something like that.
Right.
So there was a little improvement in that this year, but nothing, major. So I don't necessarily compare the scores as much as where do we rank in the state. And we're still got a long ways to go just to get even into the top 50%.
For sure. And I mean, even to get a somewhat decent analysis, it's going to be like a 3-year window before we can say, okay, was that really something that we did, or was that just a blip on the screen? We went up in achievement in math in every single building. Mm-hmm. I mean, it wasn't massive, but it was like a point or, a couple points here or there. It was a growth, but is that just a blip, or is that part of what we're doing at the Bridges level to make that? And I think there was a significant or more of a growth at that Bridges level, at the elementary level, than anywhere else in that zone. And then 7th grade was the only other zone that had a lot of growth. I mean, achievement in the math zone. The other thing that we're going to do is not beyond like ACT, beyond, these major, the forward testing, and what we see here too is that you got to remember we're going to do Ames Web 3 times a year, and that's on literacy, that's on math. So we'll be able to see what's going on there. And it's not just going to be K-8. It used to be only K-8. It's going to be K-12. So we'll be able to see, how our students are doing all the way through that 12th grade level too, and assess where that's going to be. So it'll be a different triangulation of data for us as well.
And is that'll allow us to kind of, get a baseline for where we are today, and like where do we need to adjust and make
30 days from now we can see like was there anything that we did that actually changed,
kind of try to close gaps or whatever in process, right?
Yes. Okay. And then the long run hope, and we'll get there, is to establish assessments that we can calibrate off of, that we can also use and say these are authentic quality assessments that we can also use as that tag of saying, this does improve the learning, and we know that the evidence is here based upon how we've written these and created these. So the triangulation would be like the Ames Web, the common assessments or those assessments, and then your ACT, your forward. So you have those 3 different points, even if this is way out of whack and you're like seeing this one number, but eventually these 2 will pop into that. I mean, if you're doing it right, based on instructional design and what we're going to be doing within those classrooms.
So does everybody take that state test or
The ACT and forward,
no, the forward test?
everyone takes it unless they opt out. I mean, which they can opt out as.
Because I saw we only had 980 kids take it, which seemed low to me. But I didn't know how that compared to other districts, if the ratio was similar.
Yeah, I'd have to look into that, Rick, to really give you that
We're
information.
over like 1,600, right?
Sure, but the forward only goes through 8th grade.
Well, that was my question.
Yeah.
Was it?
Yes,
Just
yeah.
Well, then how did they get Horace Mann in there?
I don't know how they got, Horace Mann is off the ACT scores. So they take their ACT scores on that junior year, and then the pre-ACT 9th and 10th grade, and that's how they use it. And they just mix it all together.
So the state does that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's what you're seeing on all those levels. Are they making any kind of changes in the ACT now? That's a whole other ball game too. But yes, that's the high school is ACT and pre-ACT.
Okay. All right.
And then K8 is forward.
Okay.
I understand why we do standardized testing for the good part of it is that it gives you the information you need, where to work and where to attack and where to plan stuff. But I've always had a problem with this one set of numbers assigned to our district that gets released, it gets to the newspapers, and to me that makes it seem like every student is that one student, and you don't get the variable. We have kids that are just outstanding, students that are scoring extremely well and having successful careers, doctors, university professors. I can name some kids, but that doesn't always come through when they start talking about testing. But if we use it in the right way to do what we were doing here, where's our problems, where we got to attack this and that, then it can be a good thing. But my wife said it's the newspapers and like to use it like the the NFL record standing, like this team is 12-1 and the other team is 2-10, blah blah blah, and rank them that way. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean we get to own what we're at and figure out. I mean, I was having a conversation with some board members at the CISA meeting last week that they brought in from different places, and one of the things that this guy kept on emphasizing is like, it's okay to mention the ugly. I mean, if we don't mention the ugly, how are we gonna ever fix it? Because it'll stick out there forever. And so when you see some of that stuff, it's like, okay, so how do we start changing it? How do we start making that shift? But then you also go real too, is like, it's not apples to apples on that sheet.
Right.
You have
and
to
dig down.
you have to dig down the numbers, and it's like, okay, we can, as long as we own that and we can see that, and then what are we doing and what are we owning in that area to like really make that achievement scores go up? That's what we gotta, and I feel fully confident in the direction that we're going with our leadership and especially our principals. We're gonna get there. It's just gonna, it's a fight and claw and scrape, and it's going to take some time, but our teachers are dedicated. I mean, that elementary focus, like, it's amazing what we're doing in such a short period of time, and they're taking on some big shifts and big changes that most people will be like, oh my gosh. But the positivity I've heard from our staff has been pretty amazing, even with the CKLA. I mean, that's a major shift for people. So
No, like I'd mentioned to you, I think we're going in the right direction. It's just, I guess one of the questions I was going to ask Adam is last time he put out this curriculum work heat map thing.
Yeah.
So I'm struggling with it because, I understand he's explained it enough times. I understand what he's trying to get to here. But like the priority standards were supposed to be done at the end of last year. We're a third of the way through this year, and we're still only at 92%. And the other ones were at different percents, but there's no schedule here that tells me are our proficiency scales on target, on schedule. They're 8% done. Maybe they're supposed to be 8% done.
Mhm.
Maybe they're supposed to be 58% done.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
So my question kind of is, who's in charge of driving this? Who's in charge of setting the schedule up? And why are we only at 92% on something that was supposed to be done at the end of last school year? Because this, from what my understanding is, this whole process kind of drives our improvement. And as a board, we don't know where we are on this schedule-wise.
So that's an interesting conversation, and we're kind of getting into an area we have to look at. I mean, we talk about priority standards. Okay, that's this, your big standards, your big rocks. Your proficiency scales, you're taking those priority standards and breaking them down so you have like almost like a 4, 3, 2, 1. So you know what this is what a 4 looks like, this is what a 3 looks like, this is what 2. Then you talk about scope and sequence, which is basically the plan for that unit for that group. And then you get into the assessments and common content. What's happening is those first 3, like priority standards, proficiency scales, and scope and sequence, that's really curriculum writing. Our teachers aren't curriculum writers. They're teachers, they're educators. And we focused on, it's good to know that information and to be able to understand where it comes from. But my a little bit worry and my question right now is like, if instructional strategies and what should be happening in the classroom should be the main focus, then why aren't we attacking that and going right to the assessments within this as well? If we know the priority standard is this, and we know the learning target is this, and then we need to know what the assessment is. So looking at the heat map, I think we have to look at it differently a little bit. And the other thing is, if I really wanted the proficiency scales for the and based on the priority standards, I can do that with AI in about 30 seconds and get all that information that quickly and be pretty accurate within that area. So I'm wondering, are we putting that front work or that curriculum writing work too much into the hands of the teachers where we could be getting and doubling down more in that instructional practice when we get to the assessments in common and then addressing the unfinished teaching and learning those. That might be the next thing. And as I'm looking at this more, it's like when we went through these things and we're starting to go through these teachers, there can be curriculum exhaustion. And people are like, so how is this helping my classroom right now? And that's the other reason I think you're seeing those low percentages at like 8 and 19. And some of our building leaders have actually said, we're going to pivot and we're going to start going into those assessments, because we know if we start talking quality assessments and we start talking about the strategies so that they can do well in those assessments, we're going to get a really, big, for our buck. We're going to get big for our buck. So I think we need to relook at that a little bit, Rick, and start saying, okay, we can produce that. That can be really far done. Do people have a sense of what that and how that looks? Yeah. Do we need to go through every single one of them to do that and take hours upon hours? I don't know. I don't think so. I think we become then curriculum writers versus educators for the classroom, where we can really double down on our instructional practice. So I think we're going to see a little bit of shift in this model, in the flow chart. And I'm saying this first tonight in front of you all, but I really think we could be driving further if we focus on that next level versus waiting for those other things. Again, those other things will get done, but I can do those in about 2 minutes I literally did this, Rick. I put in the proficiency template and proficiency scale. I put the priority standards in there on an AI generated, and it did it for me in like 2 minutes for all the standards for social studies. And it was pretty accurate. I mean, not that it's like it's said and done, but then the teachers could actually look at it and say like, okay, now we can put 20% of tweaking this and we get what we need to get. And it's a lot faster versus this could take years to get some of that stuff done.
And I'm not a teacher, don't pretend to be, don't have the ability to be, but if I were to say, I would have expected if I had said to a 5th grade math teacher, what's your priority standards? And then we were asking for 8 or 9 of them, they could list them off the top of their head.
Yeah.
But yet we're a year and a third into it and they're not all done, which I don't comprehend that.
And that, like you said, who is responsible? I think we have to double down with our principals and, start owning that and saying, hey, are you done with this or not? Now, some of them, based on like curriculums and priority standards changing in the state, that might be the reason why you have 92%. Like when you have world language, it just shifted, your PE just shifted. So that could be the two right there that they're not done because all those things just changes statewide.
Right.
So there could be intricacies like that as well.
And that's okay. I mean,
Yeah.
it's fine for the schedule to change, stuff comes up and you
Right.
change the schedule. But that's what I would like to see, whatever this right schedule is, I would like to see a schedule that we could track to know that
I agree.
we're on top of that.
I'm just gonna see if this is kind of weird. We were talking about the heat map there a little bit about completed, so that already got through that. This is the behind the scenes work. I mean, again, we got math coaching here with Tammy, and she goes from here to the middle school as well. So there's crossover, again, helping out. Literacy coaching, that's Jen Towell. She's doing all that across K-12. Instructional planning opportunities. So every single PD day, that once a month and Friday, we actually take an instructional planning guide and they actually look at like creating lessons based upon all those other groups too. So if there are these groups in the student, how are you going to make sure that those students are also getting, part of this lesson and learning? And it really literally states those kind of factors and those groups on the top to say, okay, what are you going to do differently? And some people will say, I don't know. Well, that's where we need to help you more and figure out like different ways and strategies to help with those. So the instructional planning opportunities, definitely on the PDs, collaborative team meetings every Wednesday. So our teams, our departments are getting together, talking about like, what does that next week look like? Or bringing an assessment. We'll review what that assessment looks like. How are you going to use that in the next, 4 days? And then you're going to come back in those 4 days and say, hey, how did it work out for you? And you're going to bring another one in. So it's like recalibrating, working with that team, having conversations and getting to that use of like just assessing where you're at and then really seeing whether or not it's working or not. And if it's not working, we got to change it.
So are those like structured in that way? Like here are the things that we should be covering in those collaborative team meetings and.
Yeah, so it's a little bit different for elementary because what they're doing is like just charting through that CKLA curriculum right now, but they're still in a sense doing the same thing. They're saying, okay, what lessons are we covering for next week? Looking at everything that has to be taught and worked on. How are you going to do that within your classroom? So we're all on the same page, that we're moving together along, and then assessment's all happening. We're working on the middle school level, but I know that the high school, they're bringing in assessments on the regular and doing that same thing. That's the conversation. Like, okay, if it's the social studies department, like bring in what your assessment is. Maybe it's an essay that we can all use that could be that same platform. That rubric could be centered around the same thing. The other thing too is like, again, AI, work smarter, not harder. You can tabulate rubrics in seconds and you can just dump your information in and all of a sudden it spits out a pretty nice rubric. Yeah, you're gonna have to tweak a little bit, but most of the work's done. So you can start on that work rather than wasting all that time on that development. I remember when I was a teacher as well as even an administrator, sometimes we would wordsmith and create rubrics for hours and days and committee it to death. And it's like, now you can do it in 30 seconds.
Are you sharing those tools with the team so that some of it's just awareness, right? Like
Correct.
If you don't know where to find it, I've been doing this for years and all of a sudden there's this great new tool, right?
We have shared, and that's where like Kurt Wismer is our tech coach. He goes out and shares those tech tools with people and says, hey, this can improve your speed. This is what it does. You can create lesson plans, you can create IPs, you can do rubrics, you can do this, you can write letters, you can write emails. If you're worried about writing an email to a family that you're like, you can do it within 30 seconds. And we have it within, right now we have a licensed one called Brisk that produces, and it's the good thing about that, it's a privacy bank too as well. So any of the information that's created there stays in the house. It doesn't go out. Okay. So the AI is just generating from within or whatever it sees and then working through that. The other great thing about that too, for correcting papers, you know how sometimes you'd wait 2-3 weeks for a paper to come back? It can do that based upon Wisconsin state standards within whatever standard you want it to. So you go to the priority standard and say, this is what I'm looking for in this paper. Boom. You put that in, within seconds, it's got feedback for every single thing that can be done in like a minute or two. So that student could get that stuff back the next day, technically. Just a learner myself, like if you wait 2 to 3 weeks, I'm just looking at the grade at the end of it. I don't care about what, but if it's the next day, I say, oh, I didn't see that, or I didn't notice that. Like, okay, now take this, talk to your partner. What are you missing here? And actually have a conversation about the learning.
So this, how do we prevent AI grading and AI generated paper? You know what I mean? Like, I love it, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's be smart, but
That's a cool thing about risk too. It can take whatever that paper is, and it can assess if it was AI or if it was copied and paste or whatever it might be, so you can see if it's their own work or not.
Yeah.
I mean, really quickly.
Hi, Adam. What time are we starting today?
We got started a little bit ago, so yeah.
I think it's 7 o'clock, so I'll grab my stuff.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, it's really up to.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe it's a rhetorical question in some ways, like, just something to think about, right? These new tools can be great. It's just,
Absolutely, you gotta slow. I mean, you gotta be mindful that it shouldn't be everything, right? Like, it shouldn't be the whole driver. Like, again, like 80-20 is a good thing,
Right.
but then it's like, if you can produce that with someone else, what are you working at? What are those skill sets that you're really gonna try to uncover? Like, and that's where you can go deeper. I looked at this the other day too. I was like, I put in just a formula in math, and I said, like, okay, so tell me how I can use this to generate, like, with the relevance of Taylor Swift ticket sales. And all of a sudden, it produced it for a middle school level, like what they could do and how it can make it. You can make anything relevant now. There shouldn't be any like question to make something boring. Or, hey, what was the Packers analytics on, the second half of the game using this formula, or what is the point of it? And it'll do that stuff for you. So like, you can really start generating some of those creations. So
Good.
Adam, we walked through a bit of your stuff, but if you could like maybe just walk through a little bit more of the DPI reports,
Sure.
And maybe there's some other questions, but and go from there. We can start there and then move forward. Okay.
Yeah, and sorry about that. I guess we never settled on a time before.
Okay. I'm sorry.
It's all good. So I think for most of us, we've had a few goes at this. So, just definitely a brief little overview, and then any questions or things you notice or things you want to add. One big thing I always like to say is, we pretty much kind of know what these reports are going to look like prior to the release in November. So we've already had a plan that probably ties to and have answers for areas that we feel like we need to work on. We don't wait for the report card to create those actions. So I think we're usually ahead of the game, which is good. The one thing to note, that very last bullet point, the achievement section's a little bit different this year just because those cut scores change. So in Wisconsin, we were kind of the most rigorous when it came to where we set percentiles. I think we're like 4th across the whole country. So people from the state met and decided to kind of put us more in that middle of all the states across the country. So that changed our cut scores a little bit and, really increased proficiency or achievement across the state. So they made some calculations to try to even that out between report cards. So in case you noticed on the report card, there's only 1 bar for achievement now instead of those 3 years, because again, can't really compare apples to apples. So they'll have 2 bars next year and then the 3 back again on the achievement end. So,
and then they'll change it again.
And then they'll change. Yeah, I mean, it seems like as we've gone through this 7 or 8 times, it's usually something and some nuance that makes a difference. So, so we have our 5 reports. Just so you all know, our Exploration High School, they were on that alternate scoring again. So they scored satisfactory. There's just basically a satisfactory or not satisfactory. So they were good there.
And is that because they're so new? Is that how that works?
Yep.
Because they haven't been at school for.
Yeah, and I think that's a
Certain amount of time.
2-year period, and then you get your official score out of 100. And then Treffer, just so you all know, when you look at that one, they're missing one of those components. They don't have that target growth score because they don't have enough students to have an appropriate number of students to be in that category. Because that's looking at your bottom 25th percentile, and that would be like maybe 4 students in that building. So, and with that building too, it's pretty volatile with the data because 1 or 2 students are really going to sway those numbers in a positive or negative way compared to our other buildings. And some other things that, other bullet points are just things that I kind of noticed. That math data is starting to shift, I would say. K5, you can especially see that. And
I kind of put, I think we've talked before, if something happens, if you see data move in 1 year, I think it's kind of hard to tell. Was it something we did or did we get lucky kind of a thing? But 2 years, I always look at that. Okay, we have maybe a positive trend starting, and then if we see 3 years of that, that is what I would call a new reality in that data and for those kids or for that building. So I think we're starting to see that with math K-5, and we're starting to see just the beginning of a shift in 6-12, and we've kind of put some resources towards that. So we would kind of expect to see that happen. ELA data is pretty flat across the district and buildings. And those were things we kind of noticed too before this, and reason we had some plans in place, and the state of Wisconsin noticed that too and put in some of those measures for literacy as well, which I think are going to be really good things for us across the state. And typical too, like we've seen before, high growth for math and ELA. For our district, that's that value added growth. So again, they look at students that are like ours, so students maybe that live or have a similar poverty rate or have similar demographics, and how do other students like that in our state, how do they move from 1 year to the next, and then they compare that to how we move those kids 1 year to the next. So based on those metrics, we would say that, hey, we do a really good job at moving students that are like ours better than most districts and schools. And then I kind of mentioned that one, that the achievement's not really comparable, or excuse me, actually that's one, just that achievement is much lower than where we want it and not indicative of who our students are. So that's one that we're always trying to shift that focus to achievement, not growth. But growth, we've got that. We want it all, so we want to get greedy. And then with all that said too, there's really great pockets of excellence, K through 12 and in math and ELA. So that's where I would say there's going to be like a grade that might have really high achievement, one grade level, or one big jump from 1 year to the next, or even a couple grade levels depending on the building or where they're at. But we want to again see that K through 12, math and ELA, not just those pockets of excellence. And then, yeah, we could peek into a report. I already have those if you want to kind of look at one and ask questions. Otherwise, just kind of open up for whatever you have here.
I just had one quick question. The priority area, like the weighted part of it, does that adjust every year? And like, what does it adjust off of?
Yes, that's based off of that economically disadvantaged rate.
Okay.
So districts that have higher economically disadvantaged rate, that growth score is going to be a bigger portion of that overall score.
Gotcha.
And I guess the research behind that, which we want to not have that in our mindset, is that, hey, kids that live in poverty or have these things, they tend to not get to proficiency like other students would, maybe just from that access to maybe early literacy, early numeracy before they get to school, or access to outside tutors or things like that. So that's kind of the rationale for the state using that. But we like to look at our kids and say, hey, they can all do great things. And even if they have some missing teaching or learning, we can give that to them within our system. So, and
then just one follow-up, like for on track, I'll use on track to graduation. When it's 25% weighted, and then there's like 4 categories, like absenteeism, graduation, are those equal, or is it like, how do you?
Yeah, and those are all, I'm trying to see if I have.
Like ours is 85.2, our number, but then when you look at absenteeism, it's 93.7 on 80.2 for K-12 through state. Like, is it off of last year, I guess, that you get your score out of it, or is it off of like a threshold that you're trying to reach?
Yeah, and these report cards have, like, for attendance and graduation, that's usually lag data, so it's a year delayed. A lot of the measures are 3 years worth of data. So it kind of depends on that one. So for attendance and for graduation, it's just like that 1 year, but it's the kind of not that school year, but the previous school year. But for the other metrics, and they're like the ELA for 3rd grade and 8th grade math, those would be 3 years worth of data. And then kind of the most recent data has the most points in the calculation, and gets a little bit lower as they go to year 2 or year 3. So
like the chronic, and I'm just using this one as an example, the absenteeism, when it's 93.7, like what, I'm very like, what's the goal? What's the, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
how do you improve? Like, other than obviously going up, but like, where is it measuring against? I guess I get the data where it's pulling from because that box up top shows that, but like,
Yeah. And that comparison point for that one, so
Yeah.
the state average
a
for
bad
that is
example.
80.2.
yeah.
So I say that's a good comparative to say like, okay, where should we be at?
Okay.
But that one is a flat percentage. So that is our, basically our attendance rate. So we have 6.3% of students who are chronically
Yeah.
absent in our district, whereas the state has about 19.8% of students are chronically absent. And that would be that 10 days or more threshold. So if you're asking, I guess, like, what's our goal
Yeah.
for that? I'd say
Well,
we're,
Yeah.
we're typically in that ballpark, and we're typically like absenteeism isn't really a issue for us in the grand scheme of
Yeah.
things as far
I'm
as.
just, I guess where I'm trying to understand if our overall score is 68.1 and it's pulling from all 4 of those categories, correct?
Yeah.
And then of that 100 points that's available, 25 of them are from that section, right, on track graduation.
Yeah.
That's where I'm wondering, like, if I read it, like, I'm just trying to interpret the data. If I'm at 85.2, does that mean I'm 85.2 of 25?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yep.
And then the part that I'm trying to get to is like, are all of those other things weighted equally, like absenteeism, graduation? You know what I mean? Like, if we're getting our max points on absenteeism, like you said, probably not worth the squeeze, right? The juice.
Yeah.
But like, if our graduation rate is below, like, is that where our focus is? And
I think on that one, it's gotta be the 2 achievement scores.
I would imagine, I mean, that's probably a bad example of what's here, but I'm just trying to
Yeah.
understand, like, as you break it down, like,
Yeah, and I have to look back at those specifically. I know, like, for the target groups, there's 4 sections in that target group, and one is worth 20%, one's 50%, one's 15, one's 15. So for that on-track group, this same thing I think comes into play. I don't think it's a
Same.
straight 33% or 25%. Yeah, you're right on. Typically for us, where we're gonna lose points in that section is gonna be that 3rd grade ELA or 8th grade math. And actually, our 8th grade math scores jumped a ton, so that really impacted this report card for that section, because just that 8th grade group compared to last year's
Sure.
8th grade group. So
okay.
yeah, and that's there's so much that goes into these and calculations within the calculations, but yeah, I think I'm understanding what you're asking now. And I can get back to you with those percentage breakdowns, but again, really for us, it's more those 2 are.
I'm probably getting in the weeds too far, but it just helps me understand. While I've already looked through it, but like,
Yeah.
it gives me a different lens to look through it. So
Well, and I think to understand, where do you focus your efforts, right?
Mhm.
If it's on something that you're already, maybe it doesn't make up a big percentage of the
Yeah.
score or whatever, like that might not be,
yeah, I just think
driving us,
we get
right?
reports, we get report outs here of our time on graduation, which are important. I don't want to say they are, but if we're succeeding at that, we should probably spend our time on something else that maybe, unless it becomes a concern. It's good to know, but maybe don't need to know it as much then.
Yeah, and I don't put much stock in, again, we have a lot of people
I
working
get
on
it.
attendance
I
graduation.
probably
but
picked the worst example. I don't
Yeah.
but
To move these numbers, that's not
Yeah.
a focus that's gonna move these.
Correct.
Those achievement
Correct.
pieces, which we, from my lens as the director, those are the things I'm kind of pushing through is, okay, if we impact achievement.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to look at. I was just putting this out to our principals again, like, and we've done this calculation with our teams, but hey, if every adult moves like half a kid per adult, so maybe like 20 students in your building, that's going to change these numbers completely. Or moves 20 kids to proficiency where they weren't proficient, the power of that. So when we look at like, oh man, I've got to help all these kids get to achievement. Well, maybe if you can help one and your person next door helps one and that person helps one or half a student, that really adds up. So, and another thing to think about with that too is that target group is really impactful because those students are scoring in 3 different areas. So that target group is your bottom 25th percentile students, but they're also in that achievement bucket, and they're probably not helping you numbers wise in that achievement because they're in that lowest 25. They're also in that growth bucket. So are they helping you in there? So a lot of times I like to look at the growth within the target group and then the growth compared to just all the other students. And there's some interesting nuances there, like for math, for instance, with FLC, really great gains in achievement, but our math target group growth isn't very good. So we're not maybe moving those kids where we're moving all kids collectively, but not that group. So that makes me think of, ooh, what are our interventions in math that maybe we need to relook at or take a closer look at to see are those really moving the needle. But again, those kids in that group are scored in 3 different spots. And if they're in 3rd or 8th grade, it might be in that 4th spot too for that.
I find it interesting that our numbers in the economically disadvantaged are high, yet our chronic absenteeism is way ahead of the state average. It doesn't seem to track. I would think they would track more closer.
Yeah, and I think there'd be some schools that would probably have that track, right? Really high poverty rate and really high absenteeism or low graduation rates. But yeah, that's definitely not us. And that probably, we can probably think of some of those reasons. Some of us have been here a while. I think our schools are pretty welcoming, and we work really hard to work with families in those situations too, where I think people don't feel like they're getting enough fingers shook at them. But hey, we really want to work with you and we care about your kids. But that could be one that we wouldn't want to see that happen, but that could be a trend that is probably out there.
Sure.
Adam, can we, just for sake of time too, can we jump to the EduClimber process? Is that okay
sure,
with you?
yeah.
Is that good? Everybody is moving forward?
Yep.
I was logged in.
And let me know too, there's so much there. So if you
Yeah.
ever want to sit down and just talk further or really get in the weeds more, we can totally do that. And
And is it this 21-22 KPIs or is it?
no, if you go to the actually 24-25.
Got it. This one right here? Final
actually,
Nfdl?
Maybe you don't
Have access yet?
have that one. Let me share it with you quick.
Okay.
All right. Oh, you might need to
Refresh.
have it pop in there, but it's Nfdl KPIs for 24-25.
There we go.
So yeah.
Okay. So you want to just walk through it as I flip through them up here? So this is the ratings scale, right?
Yeah, we kind of peeked this a little bit a few times. I don't know if the board was complete with all of you, but this is basically a way just to basically have a visual for every KPI. So as he scrolls down, we have our learning and academics. So one of our KPIs is report cards. So you can see report card scores. We look at the district for that score, but we have just all the buildings there. So kind of just in time look at that data point. That student connectors, that next visual is again looking at, and I have to get, that's kind of a number we get towards the end of the year, but working with Jillian and others at the high school too, to kind of try to get that number up to date. So if we ever want to say, hey, where are we currently at right now? We have that, but it has last year's score. We're just waiting on this year's score to fill that into where our current state is.
And do people know what the connectors means? It's like, youth apprenticeships, bridging them to, different, experiences in the work field to college experiences. Is AP in there too, Adam, or is it just?
And if you hover over that, by the title, there's a little I on there.
Yep.
That would tell exactly what it is. I don't want to misspeak on.
College cover enrollment in college level courses. So
is that 6.3% that our podcast told us about?
possibly, yeah.
Okay.
We shot it out through that. You're right. Because it is about, it's 64 kids. Is that what the number is?
Yep.
Yes.
So that's probably,
Yeah. Mhm.
Well,
Or excuse me, percentage.
Percentage?
64%
Okay.
of students
Ah.
either
Oh, okay. Well, that's way more than
have met one of those.
hallucination there.
Yeah. And on the report card, some of those pieces are, if that was a report card recording you were hearing, some of those are on the report card, but not all of them that we look
Sure.
at on the KPI. So,
Sure.
and this is our new assessment, Ames Web Plus. So we have that current number for fall. And then that winter and spring score will fall in there. And
What is
probably
this
seen-
line right here? Is this, what is
Yeah,
this
and
sharing?
those lines are just that goal for those 3 stars. So
Okay,
at the bottom of each visual shows like, on those 2 examples, 60% would be our 3 stars. So that line's at 60%. So
so this is ELA, this is math over here.
Yep.
Okay. Based on Ames Web, the new, and this is just elementary, or is this elementary
This is
and middle school?
district-wide.
Okay,
Yep,
district-wide, okay.
district-wide.
Because high school has not taken it yet.
Yeah, so high school's not in this yet because there's a little issue of just a setup there, but they'll take it in winter. So that was that learning and academics bucket. So this is financial and operations. So again, just
Fund
we have our
balance.
bond rating. Yep. Fund balance. Maria gave me that number. So that is kind of
Changed a little bit too.
up to date from I think a week or so ago. But
Mhm.
and
Audit
audit
findings.
finds that one's already done for the year because we went through it. So we already see where we fall in that one as a goal, staying below those 3 findings. So
And this will be a big thing too with our new directors of buildings and grounds, Joe Schneider, who's starting next week, Monday. He's come through already once on a walkthrough, did a really nice, like people enjoyed that. And he's coming in one more time Thursday, excuse me. So this is something that we got to look at in terms of like playing out, like what we're going to need, like when's the new roof coming, when's, you know, all those things are putting in place. So we're set to go with that as well. Technology plan.
yep, and that one is still last year's. I'll have to kind of just update that with Ivan, but and moderate. I know Maria's been out, so I haven't gotten to update that one yet.
But this went up quite a bit, I think, from the year before. We had a couple injuries, you know, that occurred, and that went up a little bit than what it was. I think it dropped it like a couple bars on the KPI.
And then these are some of those other pieces, student activities. So that'd be that one. Jill and I were chatting about that one to find a way to kind of have that number right at the ready, kind of any moment. There's some ways that we can get that in at Climber, so we kind of are going to play around with that. But I think in the past we typically would just have that at the end of the year. But I'd love to have as many of these as possible. If you were asked or someone says, "How are we doing?" we can pull this up and have it at the ready.
And this was the fall survey last year for parents.
Yep.
We held on this right now because of the referenda survey. So we're going to wait till spring to send that out back to families because we just don't want to over and kill them with the surveys itself. So it was 92%. That's like all these numbers up here. Sense of belonging, they feel that. Activities, 90% they enjoy. The enjoyment of coming to school. Leadership, 93% positive. And then they were 95% would refer this school district to other people.
And then staff engagement, same thing, right? Of waiting for that end of year.
Yeah, and it's like, this is based on like, I feel like engaged when I come to work. That's the question. And that was 90% of positive like response in that area.
Do we have like benchmarks for?
We do for all these.
Yeah, are we gonna like, is that able to be put in like you had the bold line on a couple of them. I don't know what those were, but like for turnover, if there's a benchmark like from the statewide, I think that would be helpful if it's able.
What we have in those, like when you look at, so for each of these areas, for each of the KPIs, they show those different levels. Like if it, you know, has this, you know, you're doing great across all of, this might have 1, this might have 2, this might have 3, you know, just go down. That's the benchmark where it comes from one to the next in that area. So something like, where were we? So like staff engagement, like this was reaching one of the highest, you know, significantly exceeds versus, and it's all broken down by percentage per KPI. And we can show you guys that again. It's part of that slide deck that we showed with everybody else. And that's also part of that handout that we have for everyone as well, where those bars hit. Now it'd be cool to be on here somewhere, Adam, where like, if you hit this, then this is what this is.
And those goals that you have like 75% or higher equals meets, how's that? how's that set up? How is that determined?
It was all determined when we were creating the KPIs. So each
Okay.
one of them are based upon what information we had, and we notched it. We also took it from other school districts who had done a lot of the work already before. So
Sure.
we used some of the same numbers within that as well.
And there are a couple I know we even looked at with our strategic plan team that said, we probably need to change these.
Yeah.
We hit 5 stars a couple of years ago, it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Need to drop
Well, that's what I
that.
was
Get
wondering if
ourselves
like
or
the
get more
meets,
rigorous.
if the meets was always the average or the
Right.
meet, like if you knew like 8.7% was the statewide turnover and that should be your meets then.
Yeah.
And then if you get better than that,
Yeah.
you exceeded, right? And then
Right.
you can, that you don't have rough to measure anymore. It just kind of floats and it's
Mhm.
unbiased, I guess, at that point.
Student attendance, student engagement,
And that's based on, that student engagement's based on a
panorama
survey
survey.
score.
Yep. And then there's the overall full day attendance report.
It's kind of interesting too. Some of these, if you click on that one, Matt, it will
Yeah.
give each building a breakdown. So a lot of these you can click in, again, for our internal purposes, like, hey, what's,
Mhm.
again, not that you want to click in
You
probably.
can see every kid. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yep.
Oh, okay, I'll take that off right away.
And we have other things in. I think if you go on that drop down up top there, Matt, you could probably
Yeah.
look at it by grade or maybe a few other. So just kind of interesting
Wow.
to see, and you could scroll across. So again, this is kind of just set up as a district view, but within this tool, you can kind of,
What is going on? No.
and super typical of attendance to dip as kids. go
Yeah,
older. That's not a uncommon trend.
That's and then we got to remember though too at the high school, it's one or more periods of that day. If they just miss one period and they could be there for the rest of the day, it's still a day.
Is that excused even, or like
This is the
straight up attendance?
that's straight up attendance.
Okay.
And we kind of see it as seat time. So even if a student is sick, it's like, hey, you're missing teaching and learning. So
Right.
even if they're medically excused or if you had a good reason, it still might be a conversation we want to have to say, hey, you're missing a lot of time and maybe we're starting to see it affect these areas. So,
See, this is another space I think would be good to have something like great to see the numbers. I don't know if they're good. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
so like how can we measure consistently throughout whether it's average or over last year? You know what I mean? Whatever that measuring stick is.
yeah.
It's cool though. It's a good visual for it.
Mhm.
And will this continue to build out? So like, meaning I can go back and see what was my 8th grade attendance last year?
Yeah, well, probably what my vision would be is every year kind of create a new one so we could look back. Like we could look back right now at last year's 23, 24 KPIs to see where,
Mhm.
but to that point too, we could, with that one there, typically I've had like a second year or a previous year just so we get a little more context. So
Sure, yep.
for that attendance one, I can maybe add that in there as well. But you're right, some of these metrics, like we're way above, like we saw in the report,
Right.
we're way above the state average. So it's silly for us to think of the state average as a 3 stars. Like,
Yeah.
we should
Right.
be
Set-
thinking
set
a
it
lot,
Yeah.
a lot higher than that. So I think it's,
Student well-being, this is all panorama. And then safety plan, expanded version, hit those zones too. That's another thing that can be reviewed a little bit too. It's
Yeah,
like
that-
getting more detailed.
Brett, I
Right.
was talking about that. It's
Yeah.
like we probably need to
Just
change
like,
this metric as
We're
well.
already hit the top, already. And it's like, okay.
Does the EduClimber, I'm assuming it's a software we use or purchase. Do they take suggestions to improve, or is it like is there a lot like is it customized or personalized?
Yeah, there's buttons you can click to make suggestions. So
Oh, okay.
if you see
Have you?
something, what
Does it
I've
work?
learned is, what I've learned as a smaller district,
Yeah.
they'll hear our voice. Sometimes
Sure.
it takes a bigger district that, obviously is,
So this is pretty
Paying
much like their template.
yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I didn't know if we had any influence on what we saw.
Yeah, but with that said too, like we can customize kind of almost all these visuals, or like you said, like, hey, let's
Oh, we
put
can.
in, like the goal, I just have it set here as like
Yeah.
a 3-star. We feel like, hey, let's have that goal line be the 5-star. We want to see that.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
can make that adjustment. And again, the wording, or like I said, if we want a second year pulled in just for context, we could do that. We could probably pull in 3 years worth of data too. So it kind of, as you sit on this a little bit, yeah, if you have ideas.
Yeah, I just see goals as like industry leading, right? Like education leading, and then we still celebrate our wins, right? Because there's a lot of great here too. And if you're at a 94 and the goal's a 95 to be 5, that's still something to celebrate. But like, what do we do to get the percent?
How we keep
You know what I
pushing.
mean? So,
Well, I remember that was a conversation when we created these, you know, I think at least I feel like, what's our goal, 3 stars or is it 5 stars?
yeah,
Yeah,
that's a great question.
myself, I would think 5 stars, you know, that might be, we might not be there yet. I'd want to, like, I don't know, 3 stars.
And you may have an incremental goal, right?
Yeah.
Until you're ultimately striving for excellence.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's
Is
where,
this shared? Like,
Not yet,
yet.
like publicly, I mean, but we've talked about like having a dash like this on our site, not something that they can just go and look into it, but
yeah,
just have this information available. I think some of those things that you're talking about though,
Yeah.
John, have to be on there with it, or else they'll be
Agreed.
like,
I think
What is-
like
you know,
we
how
talked
it's-
about like a newsletter or like, you know, sharing. I mean, this is a great opportunity to see
Yeah.
that and bring, like you said, tell the story after.
Mhm.
So,
and on your end, I could put you in the system and share this with you, really just give you like permissions just to see this, and then I could put you in what they call top secret mode, so you wouldn't see student names at all.
Mhm.
You would just see numbers, random numbers, so you couldn't, you know.
Yeah.
be-
but even that
so I can't
last,
check on my kid. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, right.
Right.
The
fact that
we're
we're below 4% for behaviors, to me, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Like people would die for that in other places. I mean, that's just a great thing
Yeah.
about being here, you know, so.
Yeah, and that behavior one is nice, because just pulling in, so that's in real time every day, that just updates on that 24/25, so.
And it pulls from another set. So like, is there a
Skyward.
manual before or no?
Yeah, pulls from itself from. that
Oh, that's
headliner,
nice.
So,
Yeah.
and we have some Skyward data coming in, but other data too, so yeah, it's nice to just. Again, some of these we can't have to wait for that survey, but then others, it's just in real time, anyone
Yeah.
could see that, or, you know, if you all wanted access, you could see that, or we can see that, but.
I think this would be, this is just me speaking from a board perspective. I think this would be helpful when we share out results, because then we all have the same language every time, right? And we can see the growth or opportunity, whatever it may be. Sometimes slide decks, it's hard to,
Yeah.
you share one and then the principal
yeah.
shares one and then that shares, you know what I mean? Like it usually are very similar, but like might look a little bit different.
And we talked too, and one way to use this as well is then, okay, here's our district KPIs. Each building could have their own.
Yeah.
Of this where, and again, I would tell them, you probably don't need to moderate, but put in
Sure.
those buildings.
Well,
specific,
academics
like,
and learning and, you know,
attendance,
yeah,
Put those ones on there where then,
student engagement. Yeah.
that building knows and can see those, and then you all could see that too, or have that presented, so. Is that the last one there? That's-
No, yeah, that's good. Experience-based license, what was that about? Did you have that
Oh,
topic
yeah.
too? Okay. I don't,
Yeah, and was that one in the
I
board
don't-
report, or?
I didn't.
Last
I know I
month,
sent
it
that to, yeah.
Yeah,
let's
it was-
see here.
In the last one.
Yeah, I remember hearing about it last time.
Okay.
Yeah, so that one is, it's newer for us, so we'll see if Matt can pull it up. But we have one educator who has not gone through a teaching program, but they have a wealth of experience in a field that you can get a work experience-based license. So that would be Josh Getch, who is our tech ed teacher. He owns his own business with, you know, metals and some of those manufacturing things. So perfect candidate to say, hey, you don't need to go to school for 4 years. You have kind of done it on the job. And this license is a 3-year license where he gets some of that kind of, okay, now you need to learn about schools, you know, kind of the content, you know, that, but learn about schools and teaching students. So for that, we create a 3-year plan, kind of based on what you see up there, like equipment, curriculum, on that left-hand side. Professional development, so talking to him, and I've met with him about, hey, what do you think you need to kind of learn about, or what things would you like to dig into? And then sometimes he doesn't know what he doesn't know, so, you know, I have options for him too. And this is one that they ask that the board then approves, and just, you know, to make that statement that you are good with that. So really, for year one, like for year three, we're probably going to change that because we maybe don't necessarily know, but we have the right to change when we get to year three. But probably one I would bring back to you next year too, just to say, hey, here's how it's changed and adjusted. But really for him, I know, yeah, he really felt good about last year, how things went. You know, when I met with him, just asking him about some of these pieces help you out, especially on that professional development end. So I know you got to talk to some other tech ed teachers, which is probably the best thing for him, is to go out there and just see and talk to others. So, and then, you know, really things that like equipment, really getting a lay of the land was his first year too, figuring out what do we have and what might we need. So now this is a year where, you know, he has more ideas of what those things could be for equipment.
Josh has been a great add to the
And
district.
is this just for, is there a certain department or is there certain roles that it can only be for one of these plans?
I'd have to look, yeah. So
Yeah.
Are you talking about like in
Like
terms
tech-
of the work? Yeah, right.
Correct.
So when you
Yeah.
come in with work experience, there's only certain areas where you
Yeah,
can actually do that, and like being in the manufacturing area for a
Yeah.
certain number of hours, then
That's great.
grandfathered or qualified him for them
Yeah.
to be able to do the next part of this, and that's where he's doing the teaching and learning part of it right now. And
Yeah.
I think
at
it's
the same
an
time-
innovative way for like, especially some of those unicorns you talk about.
Yeah,
harder to
coming out of the
fill roles.
trades.
Yeah.
Well, I remember talking to him like before anything. We were just talking about like we're looking for, you know, good tech ed teachers, and this is before he was even thinking about it. But then he came back to me and are you guys still looking? And I'm like, yeah, we can. Yeah, put your name in. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
But so
So is he in year 2 of 3?
He's actually, yeah, in year
Okay.
two,
Yep.
yep. And I think the only, I mean, it, and this is again newer for us, but people have kind of encouraged me like, yeah, have your board approve that. So I think the only reason you maybe wouldn't is if you don't believe that's an appropriate route to take. And I would recommend that this is a great route for someone to take instead of saying, hey, go back to college for 4 years and get your teaching license.
Yeah.
No, let's give you some training on the job and you have some wealth of experience already. So
Yeah, is this different than some of the other programs where teachers can get licensed, like the right program and stuff like that?
yeah, and he has some elements of that. So he is doing some of that. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I think he's in that right.
He is the
program
right
as
program.
well. Yeah,
Yes.
so he's getting
Oh,
that in
okay.
addition to, and they're kind of again helping. That kind of coincides with this, and they're helping him with that more learning about what education's all about piece of it. So, and we have some other unique licensing pieces out there. One is district sponsored, so it might be a teacher that they're certified up to 8th grade, but we want them to teach 9th grade, where it's like, okay, you can go back to school for 4 years, get that extra grade, or hey, we'll vouch for you as a district and we'll give you training over a 3-year period on how to kind of get that next grade level learning, which when you're talking 1 grade typically isn't much. It's more, hey, you're already doing that on the job and you're getting that experience as we go. And so that's one we've used to get creative too, as opposed to asking people to go back to school and get that licensure.
it prohibits the jumping through hoops, and there's just so many little things like that in education that, again,
Yeah.
we're a grade away, and we
Yeah.
know that they can make that happen. It's just making that happen with them. So
So we'll put that on
next time,
Mondays.
yeah, for the yeah. So we get that. Just wanted to lay that out there. Adam, I'm sorry we kind of like went fast forward through some of your stuff, but I think we qualified most of the stuff, and we did talk a little bit about CT time and
Okay.
all those other things, so they're aware of how
Okay.
that works as well. So
Yeah, and I'll keep that updated as we go through, maybe throw that at you all here and there, so that heat map and,
yeah. Okay.
all right, great.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Adam.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yes.
And sorry about missing the time here. It's 7 o'clock, so
We
I'm glad I checked.
we got it done. So
Yeah. All
Thank you.
Take
Have a
care.
good
Good
one.
night.
All right.
so that's all within my report. So turn it over to you.
Perfect. We'll move to new business. We have 2 items. First one is consider approval of 3-year library plan that was just discussed. So if there were any questions, please ask. Otherwise, I'll look for a motion to approve.
So moved.
I'll second. And then roll call.
All right, Hawk,
Yes.
Geckerman,
Yes.
Jaeger, yes, Matthew,
Yes.
Humpner,
Yes.
Next item is consider approval of paperwork for DPI early start date for calendar, which Matt discussed last time we were together. I don't know if you have anything else. you
Yeah,
want to add to it?
the biggest thing is I gotta get in, but January 1st. So if we can make this happen, then I can get it to the DPI, and then it's up to them. I mean, they can choose one way or the other. Basically, they've got the control over that. Our calendar team just met like last week. We created 2 different calendars. One if it does, one if it doesn't. And then we're just gonna wait and see what actually happens and then make the decision after that. But if we can get this, then that would be the most suitable for us.
And that's the 3 days prior to Memorial Day weekend? or whatever.
Correct.
Is it right?
Yeah, so it's like the Wednesday, the 28th would be the start date, I think.
Did we look at for the, this is off this, but for the calendar for Thanksgiving week, ever not having school Monday, Tuesday? Did we ever look, I mean, the reason I say that is I'm sure there's a lot in our
Deer
area.
hunting?
Yeah, there's a lot of people out of school, so I don't know if it's mislearning.
It's like balancing throughout the rest of the year with the amount of time that we have off for staff and students.
Okay,
So if you did that, then you couldn't have like a break in February.
gotcha.
So you have only a limited amount of times that we do that. So we have that October time where there's a couple days, Thanksgiving where we take the one Wednesday. And then you've got 2 days in February.
Okay,
So that's what you're playing
Change
with in
that.
terms of
Gotcha.
changing it. And so you'd be then giving up a February time where some people like that.
Do
Just a
we
little bit of
see
break.
like a significant attendance?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a dip there. So, I mean, there's a lot of people go with their families, so.
It's very common up. in the
Farther
districts
north.
Yes.
Up
Yeah.
north.
Deer hunting
where,
day.
you know, they're out in the woods, the districts themselves, so,
Mhm.
but more urban areas, I think it's not that common.
Yeah.
The Wednesdays proved to be very good. People, it turns into a
Yes.
5-day weekend.
Yeah, that's a good.
That's been
Yeah,
a very,
absolutely.
very appreciated one from not only our families, but our staff too, as well,
Right.
so.
All right, so then it would be consider approval of the paperwork for the DPI early start date for calendar.
So moved.
Second,
All right, enroll.
All right, Humper,
Yes.
Hawk,
yes.
Geckerman,
Yes.
Jaeger, yes, and Matthew.
Yes.
All right, excellent. That is our new business item. We are now gonna look to move to closed session. So I'll look for a motion to go to closed session.
So new recording.
Second.
All right, enroll.
Okay, Jaeger, yes.